All right, everyone. Let's get started. It's 5 o'clock Pacific time. We have a couple of people to introduce tonight. We've got Deb Rose. Deb, go ahead and start your camera. We've got Deb Rose, who grew up in meetings and is also a retired FBI special agent. And then I don't know if Denise Doucette is on yet. She's a corrections counselor, so she's going to be joining us as well. And of course, we have Dr. Bolin, our executive director, Todd Price, retired FBI special agent, and Lauren Rose, and then myself, Cynthia Lyles, private investigator. Deb, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself? Oh, you're muted.
Lips were moving, but no sound coming out, right? Hi, everybody. I'm Deb Rose. I am a retired special agent. I spent 33 and a half years with the FBI and all of those years in Texas. After retirement in 2015, I went to work as an investigator in the private sector and have retired from that now. I live in a Gulf community in north of Houston, and I'm truly retired now, other than volunteering to help Cynthia here.
Is Denise on? Denise Doucette? I don't think she's on quite yet, so hopefully she'll pop on a little bit later. So tonight is Q&A format, pretty much the whole thing. I don't know if there are any questions in the chat yet, but I was gonna lob to Todd and Deb. There was a letter that went out from the Oregon, Idaho workers to the Friends, and it stated something along the lines of they were looking forward to the FBI kind of clearing things up. And I'm going to find the exact quote, but can you guys talk about what the FBI does and doesn't do?
Todd, do you want to take it first?
Uh, well, sure, but I think we've addressed this in different calls in the past, but just it does probably bear repeating. The FBI is not, their function isn't to clear. Their function is to investigate federal crimes, to gather evidence, to present that evidence to a grand jury through the U.S. Attorney's Office, and then normally, as is mostly the case, indictments are brought by the grand jury and arrests are made, and the rest goes through the federal court system. But clearing any individual is not the function of the FBI. It's to gather evidence to prosecute federal crimes.
Yeah. I found the quote. It says, "We look forward to the investigation establishing clearly what is and isn't true." That's not going to happen.
No.
No. Do you have anything to add to that, Deb?
No, I completely agree with Todd and his explanation. The FBI is a truth-seeking agency. They look for the truth. They look for evidence that they can present to the prosecutors, the federal prosecutors, who then can bring charges or not. And even if they don't bring charges, that does not exonerate anyone. That is not a clearing of anyone. It may just simply be insufficient evidence, and they just can't believe they could get a guilty verdict. But if they do bring charges and they prosecute, the only way anyone is exonerated is with a not guilty verdict. So the FBI doesn't clear anyone.
Right. So, I mean, this is pretty common messaging these days by the workers. And so it's confusing to people, I think. They have this idea that the names that we've put out there, somehow the FBI is going to come in and clear these folks. And that, first of all, they'd have to be reported to the FBI. We don't know if all of these will be reported to the FBI, but that's just not what's going to happen. So Do we have any questions in the chat yet?
Cynthia, can I add one more thing?
You bet.
Just there are a lot of survivors out there with stories. There are a lot of people coming forward with information. And just because the FBI doesn't bring a case against someone or present it for prosecution does not mean something didn't happen. For the FBI to bring charges, there has to be some crime that's within the jurisdiction of the FBI. So many of these cases, there's just not a statute to cover it, but it doesn't mean there's not a state statute that would cover whatever the violation may be.
Right. And then we get into statute of limitations issues with those charges. So just because somebody's not charged does not mean they're exonerated.
Got a couple questions for you.
All right.
How many workers have allegations?
I haven't run the data recently, but every time we've run it before, it's about 40%. We're over 800 reported perps now. And previously, whenever we've run that data, about 40% of those reported alleged perpetrators are workers or former workers.
How can someone find out who in their area has allegations?
Well, right now they can contact AFTT.
Can you give us an update how overseers are handling your reports?
Well, they're not.
And Cynthia, just to maybe add to that, I think it was posted on the Facebook, on AFTT's Facebook page, the letter that you got that was signed by Rob, at least, whether he authored it, I don't know, but that letter seemed to indicate that they're putting a stop to communication. Isn't that right?
Well, they were never communicating with me, so I do not think Rob wrote that letter. The California workers have never communicated with me. I've notified them of perps, but they've never written back. So, but yeah, that's right. I mean, it's interesting. I did print out the letter that Rob Newman did last year in April to the friends in his jurisdiction, and he talks about how they must protect the children and they need education, awareness, and preparation, honest conversations. They're grateful for professionals. They're very sorry for the pain and loss of trust, and they're concerned about the survivors. So honestly, it's really frustrating because they say one thing, but their actions tell another story. So, I mean, in every instance in California, they've made accommodations for the perpetrators and they've questioned the allegations. And that's just a fact. Even on this latest one, when I informed them of allegations, that they immediately questioned the veracity of the allegation. And that's not having the backs of survivors. That's looking out for the perps.
And Cynthia, isn't it true that, like, no one is suggesting that when there is an allegation that there shouldn't be some type of an investigation into it, which is part of what AFTT does. And when the letter is written to the overseer, that investigation has already occurred. And
right.
So AFTT just is informing them that these charges and their credible allegations, which is the standard for the safety of the community. It's not the standard for criminal charges, but it is for the safety and welfare of the fellowship community, a credible allegation. And then other steps can take place after that to just, for example, like the one that you most recently shared with Rob concerning Sharon, I guess it
Yeah.
was. And nobody was suggesting that there shouldn't be other things, but they just were like, no, we're not having any more conversation about it. Bring it to law enforcement and we'll do whatever they tell us to do.
Correct.
Is that a fair summary of what kind of took place?
Yep, and they literally questioned the veracity of the reporter. Yeah,
Exactly.
must be mistaken identity, maybe undependable source. No, this is a dependable source, has very good memory, and there are other people who corroborate it. So,
Which you told him. And that's also the
yes,
key, that was
yes,
also shared. And then after you said that, then they said, we're not going to communicate anymore.
yep.
Are there any active U.S. workers on the list?
Yes.
Which overseers have been interviewed by the FBI?
Well, I know several have. I don't know the whole list yet. And I don't know that we will know the whole list, but we know several have.
Right. And the FBI isn't going to share. They don't share that unless there's an investigative purpose to share it with you or with AFTT, and that's not. They're not in the information sharing business. They're a one-way street, and information goes into their investigation and it doesn't come out unless it goes out to the grand jury, but not to lay people.
Right.
Todd, does the FBI care if there's money to be seized? Is that what this investigation is about?
I would not, based on my understanding, I do not believe that is what this investigation is about as its core theory of criminal investigation. That could, I mean, if a particular criminal charge could be proven and there were funds used that facilitated that crime, I mean, there could be something like that. Generally, from what my understanding, and Cynthia, if in your communications, just correct me if I'm wrong, but most of the money side that's being reported is probably going to be passed to other agencies within the federal or state and local governments, but that's not the main thrust of this investigation. It's crimes against children and abuses that have occurred in that whole arena of crimes, right?
For sure. I mean, their subpoena was directed that way last year, and even their press release earlier this year is directed at the abuse allegations.
So we've had a lot of, well, actually, the participant number has doubled since we opened the meeting. And we're getting repeated questions of how many active workers are on the list, how many workers are on the list with allegations. Could you briefly just repeat that?
Sure. So I haven't run the data recently, but every time I've run it previously, about 40, we have over 800 perps reported now. I think we're at about 840. And every time we've run the data, about 40% of the reported perps have been workers. And there are active workers that have allegations.
So in your opinion, do you feel conventions are safe or can be made safe?
Well, I think conventions can be made safe. I don't think they should be having conventions now until everything's sorted out, but that's just my opinion. I'd give that to some other people here.
Anyone want to answer that on our panel?
Deb, what do you think?
If you go to conventions, you are responsible for your children and for not putting yourself in an unsafe position.
How about resources? Are there any targeted specifically to help convention owners create a safer environment?
Well, there was a team that put together what good policies would look like. I don't know if those specifically looked at convention owners, but I mean, all convention owners should have a really good umbrella policy, in my opinion, and they should also get event insurance. And if they could get event insurance that covered sex abuse and child sex abuse crimes, that would really be ideal. But they're definitely at risk of being sued if something happens on their property.
And one thing just to add to that, but even in a liability just from in the civil world of the whole legal side of things, that in insurance, the insurance and all that protects potentially an asset, the convention grounds, but it does nothing to protect children. And so those types of things, they can mitigate risk potentially, but like Deb said, people just gone are the days when you turn your children loose on convention grounds and believe that they're going to be safe. People must not, if they choose to go to a convention. And I mean, I just think trust has been broken on so many different levels. It's really hard to imagine that anybody would think that that the leadership is trying to protect children. I don't think they've proven that. So all the liability policies, they may protect potentially the assets of the convention grounds, but it's not going to keep children safe.
There seems to be a very high degree of trust once an allegation has made and the accused says, "I'll never do it again." Seems to be a very high level of trust in the high levels of ministry that that's the truth. But from our experience as law enforcement officers and investigating crimes against children, and even those who have deeply studied this within the prison walls, a pedophile does not rehabilitate. So for those of us who understand that, there is no trust anymore once a valid or a believable accusation has been made. So on convention grounds, I don't say don't go to conventions, but again, you are responsible for your safety and the safety of your children when you do go.
Correct. And one thing that's really concerning to me, like we found out this week, that now they're letting another perpetrator back into meetings, and he had multiple allegations. And so they're arranging this meeting for him at a home, and the people that have children that went to that meeting are now going to have to go to another meeting. So very special arrangements for this perpetrator. And that, to me, you're basically endorsing this perpetrator and his involvement in the community. And I mean, I can tell you as a private investigator working on a civil case, I would be looking at this pretty hard. They've endorsed him, and they've said, you can be part of our community, and that gives him access to the community. So there may not be any children in that meeting, but Grandma and Grandpa Smith might invite him over for lunch with their grandkids. You've endorsed his access in your community. And I think it's a really slippery slope and bad practice.
Well, and just like Denise has shared, and the whole concept of that approach to a perpetrator does not help them get to the place where they can repent. And from as spiritual leaders and as a spiritual community, that should be a very high goal of all of this. And you're not helping a perpetrator repent when you first believe that they didn't do it, and then you put them into positions where they'll be tempted by children, potentially when, like you say, like a grandparent in a restricted meeting brings their visiting grandchildren to that meeting, and this temptation cycle that maybe they've suppressed or maybe they've had counseling for. We don't even know that that's occurring, but if it was, they get to the place where they're tempted by somebody's grandchildren, and it doesn't help that person repent. And repentance doesn't require the person to be sitting in a fellowship meeting. They can repent and they can still not be trusted with people's children.
Correct. And these people, the pedophiles, look for access. So, I mean, just having access to family members so that they can then get access to the children within that family. They don't necessarily have to be in the meeting. It's just access. And you know, I mean, the people in the meeting might be saying to each other or themselves, "Oh, he's such a great guy. He's fine."
Grooming. That's grooming.
Yep.
Classic grooming. That's just what they do.
Yep.
So we have a mathematician in the group who has calculated that if the number of perps is 800, 40% is 320. Is that correct, that there's possibly 320 workers on the list?
Yes, these are historical. I mean, we're getting perps reported to us from 90 years ago, really 90 years ago. So a lot of these are historical. The perpetrators deceased, survivors are still living. But yes, there has been an inordinate amount of workers who have perpetrated against children. That's a fact.
Do you have any more allegations coming in the near future?
Yes. We're slowly releasing the names as we finish up our investigations.
I believe Denise is on. I'm hopeful.
Good.
Are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes. So Denise, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Okay. Hello, everyone. Please excuse me for coming on late. My name is Denise Doucette, and I have a background of conducting treatment with sex offenders in a prison setting. And it's something that I was certified in when I was working. I'm retired now. And it's something that I had a passion for in terms of helping them be accountable for their behaviors and helping them to strive to be in the recovery process if they chose to be.
Hey, Denise.
Hi, Todd.
Hi, can I just, before you got on, I had just answered about when a predator or pedophile or perpetrator, however you want to, is put back into a meeting after they're believed in their denials that anything ever took place. Can you just kind of share how that doesn't help them to get to a place where they actually can get better and hopefully repent and all that?
Yes, I'd be happy to speak about that. A really good analogy that I think is helpful for the general population is that in this day and age, a lot of us are familiar with the struggles that a person can have when they're addicted to alcohol or they're addicted to drugs. And often when a person struggles with addiction, they have to skin their knees, so to speak, meaning that a lot of times they have to have major life consequences occur because of their drug use or because of their drinking of the alcohol in order for it to get their attention to desire to make some change and do something different. So for instance, if a person struggles with alcoholism, perhaps they're arrested for driving under the influence a couple of times, or perhaps they have a divorce because their spouse isn't willing to cope with the alcoholism any longer. There's natural occurring consequences that occur for everybody in this life in relation to our behaviors. So more specifically in relation to a perpetrating population, and when I say the term perpetrating population, I mean people who are conducting sex offenses. For members of that population, it's not as readily accepted in our society for them to reach out for help. It's become pretty acceptable in our society for somebody with a problem with drugs or a problem with alcohol or a problem with mental health issues to reach out for help. But a lot of the perpetrators are still in the shadows, and there's so much shame and there's so much labeling and there's so much, well, it's an illegal behavior as well. There's so many consequences that could occur. They just don't reach out for help until they've been caught. And within this church specifically, the vast majority of the perpetrators that I'm aware of have not been caught and have not gone through the criminal justice system. So be that the case, if they have credible allegations against them, if we continue to mitigate with our behaviors towards them the credible allegations and continue to allow them to be in meetings freely and continue to have the freedoms that people enjoy in meetings, that's doing them a disservice, because that's not going to get their attention that they have a problem and that they need to seek help for the problem. So actually, by us being kind and open and minimizing whatever the credible allegations are with the perpetrator, we're doing them a disservice, because we're giving them a message inadvertently that they don't need to change, that they just need to quell the behavior or they need to hide it better. We're not giving them the message that we want them to seek help. And that's a huge disservice towards them. And that's part of the problem within a Christian church, is that while we want to have empathy towards our fellow brothers and sisters, empathy at times can be counterproductive, especially with members with this population. We can have empathy on the one hand that there's a problem, but accountability is extremely important. And if we let them off the hook or let them slide in terms of the accountability piece, we're doing them a huge disservice, because they'll just continue to fly under the radar, so to speak. Am I touching upon what you had asked about, Todd?
That is exactly. Yep. Thank you. And much better than I could have ever said.
Actually, Denise, I'd like to ask a follow-up question to that. So is this normally what you see in terms of perpetrators and community? Is this the normal response, or is this absurd and bizarre in terms of your clinical experience?
Well, when we're saying a community, do we mean within the 2x2 community, or do we mean community in general?
I would say whatever your experience is in comparison, society versus a small community like this.
Okay. Society in general, again, it's more comfortable for the majority of the people to look the other way. Because if you look the other way, then you're not trying to scrutinize the situation, and then you're not becoming privy or aware of, the horrible behaviors that are being perpetrated. It's very much something just in society in general that people do not want to take a look at. So again, it's kind of covered up. It's swept under the rug, and that just enables the perpetrators to continue to fly under the radar. And then more specifically within the 2x2 community and or church, again, we're not doing the victims any favors, and we're not doing the perpetrator any favors by not confronting the situation head on and sorting it out and doing healthy boundary setting to both protect current survivors and any future survivors, and also to hold the perpetrator accountable. But it's just very common that people do not want to delve into this subject, because it's such a heinous subject to look into. And so again, we could be doing a real disservice. A lot of us do a real disservice by not confronting it head on. I hope I'm touching upon what you're asking for, Lauren.
Yeah, I think in specificity, are the stats comparable to society, or are they much higher inside this community? A perpetrator to membership?
Yes. From what I've observed from the data that's been collected by Advocates for the Truth, and also by the reports that have been made over the last year that we've become aware of, it appears that statistically speaking, there's a higher concentration amongst us within the 2x2 church. That's my impression. And to the degree that, again, that there's no accountability and things aren't, there isn't healthy boundary setting being done in relation to credible allegations. It just gives the person free rein, the perpetrator free rein to continue with his or her behaviors for multiple generations, it appears.
There's a question from someone asking about a perpetrator whose parole officer has advised them to be in meeting in order to be held accountable. Can you speak to that?
I don't believe that. I don't believe that.
Okay, so did you want me to speak on that?
Oh, yeah, Denise.
Please.
Okay, all right. I just did, okay.
Denise is probably going to say, no, that's true. Go ahead.
No, Denise isn't going to say that because even when I introduced myself at the beginning of this, I also had a time in my career that I was a probation parole agent. And I did not specify in that role with sex offenders, but as a probation and or parole agent, depending on which state you live in, if you are supervising a caseload of sex offenders, you want to be very specific in terms of what they can do and what they can't do. And you want to be very specific with the clear messages that you give to them. So in my mind's eye, if I was supervising a caseload of sex offenders as a parole agent or probation officer, if I were to say to that individual that they wanted to, if they were saying to me that they wanted to have some spiritual interactions in their life, I would be very clear that the church and or the meetings that they went to would not have any members of the victim population that they perpetrated upon. And that's why I made the suggestion early on after the Dean Brewer situation came to light that we would have closed meetings if we were to accommodate perpetrators within the church, that they could only go to a meeting that would not have any member present of their victim or their chosen victim pool. So I can't envision anybody who would have any knowledge in supervising sex offenders that they would tell them just to get back into a meeting and not check out whether or not children and or women were present, if those were members of their victim pool. Now, a probation officer or parole agent who doesn't have any experience with sex offenders and who's just maybe has a generalized caseload, meaning people who have committed all kinds of crimes, may in their own acknowledged unprofessional or not unprofessional, but in their own training, maybe they would make the suggestion that the person go to church because spiritual needs are important for people. But if the person was supervising a sex offender caseload, no, I couldn't see them just to tell them just to get back into church.
Right. And then as an institution, that's just a really bad idea. And I think you might not have been on, Denise, but I was talking about how in this community, especially in the meeting community, that's a very slippery slope because the perpetrator might be in a meeting where they really embrace him and pretty soon they're having him over for lunches, grandchildren or whoever are there. And it's just a slippery slope. And we've seen it before already in the last year. There are some examples where people were supposed to only be in meetings with no children and workers move, friends move in and out of the area and they're back in meetings with children. So and from a liability standpoint, it's a really bad idea. If the church could be sued, it'd be bankrupt because of these cases.
Yes, it's a slippery, toxic slope.
Mm-hmm.
Not only for anybody who could be victimized in the future by that individual, but it's a slippery, toxic slope for that individual.
Yeah.
The perpetrators that I worked with in the prison setting, we had a specific sex offender parole unit that I could be in contact with anytime when an inmate was pending parole if he successfully completed treatment. And a very clear message was given to him, as well by the prison staff, but also by the parole agents, that he needed to make sure that he did not put himself in the position to be triggered by being present with members of his victim pool. And so if somebody's living a true life of recovery, they don't want to put themselves in that position. They shouldn't even be asking to be present in those type of meetings. But the problem is that, again, the general public, and that includes the people who are part of the 2x2 church, they just don't understand the nature of perpetrators and how their minds work and how their minds are different than the average non-perpetrating mind and how they can be triggered. And they don't understand that. And so by their lack of knowledge and by their empathy, per se, of hoping that this person can enjoy the same fellowship, they're really doing a disservice. And for anybody who's wanting to be in open meetings or meetings where all ages and all genders could be present, that's extremely questionable. That person hasn't even started the repentance process yet.
Yep.
So I'm going to put
Hey, can I just add one thing, Mo? Sorry. You know, to just the message that sends to victims when this perpetrator is brought back into meetings, and usually like they're trying to get them back in just as quickly as they can. The message after all of the years of suffering that many of the victims have gone through, then to bring that person back and say or bring the perpetrator back into meetings, even if that perpetrator isn't actively in a little fellowship gathering with people who have been victimized, generally the field or the state or the region knows that this person has been brought back in, and with all of the social media mechanisms for that to occur, it sends a message to all victims that this is tolerated and these people are being brought back.
Yes, we're propping these people up. We're not doing anything for you. We're propping these people up. And I say it's like walking by the wounded and bleeding in the ditch and stopping to give them a kick. When you put their perps back in meeting, that's what you're doing. That's what it feels like to survivors. And I think it's reprehensible.
Yes, I agree wholeheartedly. The ministry needs to make a decision if they're going to be perpetrator-centric or victim-centric. Because I agree wholeheartedly with Todd and Cynthia that it sends a message to all victims. We're not willing to have a safe environment for them, that the perpetrator, for whatever reasons, is more valuable.
Well,
and if that's the case, maybe they should start a perpetrator church and just be with them.
I'd say
I don't know.
they have made it very clear what by their behavior and actions, or lack of behavior and lack of actions, where they stand and what their values and morals are. So I think it's very clear to survivors what they're all about, and it's a perpetrator-centric fellowship. That's what you want to call it.
Yes, I agree. That's what I was. Yes.
Can you expand on the circumstances of there being active workers with credible allegations? Can you talk a little more about whether you've confronted overseers and what has their response been?
Their response has been to leave them in.
Claiming false allegations?
Yeah.
I'd also like to add to that, a lack of response is also a response by an overseer. An overseer not writing back to a survivor, which has happened hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times. That is a response. That is a value. Whether or not it's a good one, that's remains to be seen.
Cynthia, is it okay to talk about like even the one that was down in Mississippi and the response and with the one that's in the work currently?
Yeah. I mean, I notified the overseer of that allegation in October. The perpetrator finally stepped out of the work. Well, he was going to still be traveling with his companion, but he wasn't going to be preaching. So that letter came out. And then a week later, the overseer let me know that he wanted to speak with me. So we spoke on the phone. I gave him a little more information, and I told him I had another allegation about that worker. And so the following week after that phone conversation, he reinstated him with full privileges in the work. So that's the response.
Had a question about how to make allegations in a way that doesn't lead to defamation.
Well, an allegation isn't defamation. And defamation and slander are if you are telling a lie. So you know it's a lie and you're telling a lie to harm someone. That's not what these are.
Does anyone want to talk a little more about how to make an allegation specifically to AFTT? Is that the best way to do it? Is there a better way?
Well, yeah, you can call the hotline, or we have survivor submission form. People contact us on our messaging apps through Facebook, for our AFTT business page. I mean, there's all sorts of ways you can contact us and make your allegation. And if you're interested in reporting to law enforcement, we can help you walk that path as well.
And just, Cynthia, just one caveat to that, though, that if there isn't a child actively a part, like if there's a child at risk today, there's a different order that report should be made, correct?
Well, yes, and even when we get those, if there are children at risk, we report them to law enforcement immediately.
Switching to survivors. On one of the last calls, you said survivors are not doing well. How can we as a community continue to support them? What are the needs? How can we help?
I can jump in on that. So currently, the acuity level of our survivors continues to be very, very high. People are not okay. They need a lot of support, trauma therapy, support within their community, safe space for them to talk and connect with other safe people. So, our needs the needs of AFTT are still very high. We need to have people continue to donate to AFTT. We're referring a number of survivors to mental health trauma therapy. Some survivors need inpatient care. And then we also provide support to take away the barriers to get to treatment. So we're providing that communal care, whether it's sending an Uber card for somebody to get transportation to go to therapy, whatever those needs might be. We're also working towards building up our volunteer advocate group. So we're currently piloting our training. We have a really robust training that we've developed, a trauma-informed training to train advocates up so that we have a group of advocates that can continue to support our survivors. So there are a lot of needs, and we encourage people, if you don't know how to help, the best way to help is to donate. We're coming into convention season, and for those of you that may have donated to conventions in the past, maybe think about donating to AFTT instead, or Fund Recovery, or Little Hooves. So that's what we're encouraging people to do. That's the best way to help, because we are just constantly referring people to treatment.
And to add to that, I'd say in the past, I guess, several weeks or 2 months since the FBI Voss has come up, we have had an exorbitant amount of survivors come forward. Cynthia and Dr. Bull and myself have talked to more survivors than we ever have before and put more survivors into therapy. So in terms of needs, I think if you're asking yourself, it's like, if this was your child, what would you do? And for a lot of you, this is your child. For a lot of you, this is yourself. This is a family member or relative. And a big lack that I'm seeing, whether you are in the community or outside of the community, is the lack of communal care. So the lack of support from family members, questioning a survivor on what happened to them, the gory details, not supporting them going to therapy, not supporting them going to inpatient, not supporting and asking, let me give you a casserole or an Uber card. There are little actionable items that you can do on a daily basis. Just checking in with someone, sending a text and just say, hey, I'm thinking of you and I'm so sorry for what you're going through. Like, those are active items. And I think by and large, if the leadership in the community is not modeling and mirroring this, then it's really hard for a community to be safe. If a community is perpetrator centric, the work we're doing at AFTT has to be a completely, our focus is completely survivor centric. And so everything we're doing, whether we're getting survivors connected to trauma therapy, getting them to inpatient, outpatient services, getting them to Little Hooves, which begins in a couple of weeks for a 5-day equine experience with a trauma therapist, sending them a care package, sending them a quilt. We check in on our survivors every couple of days, and whether they live in New Zealand or Brazil or they live in Massachusetts, these are all elements of communal care that have to be consistently modeled, mirrored, and also this community doesn't have that. So I just ask that you guys really start to think about, it's like there are people all around you that are hurting and suffering, and there are little things you can do. Even a coffee gift card, sometimes after therapy, there's nothing better than a cup of coffee and a donut, so do that, or sending a little heart emoji. Like, those are simple things that anyone can do. So yeah, survivors are hurting. And then the other part of this is that your online presence actually matters. When you see a survivor that is hurting online, reaching out to them and making sure they have resources they need. A lot of times that's someone's only place or cry for help, and sometimes the only place that they feel safe. So if you see that online, also reaching out, you can reach out to us at AFTT. There's a lot of different people on this call that could direct you to the right resources or the right place. But it's also being an advocate in online spaces as well as the real world.
There's a rumor that a convention ground is vetting attendees through AFTT. Is that true? You're muted, Cynthia.
There may be one in Alaska that had some known visitors.
This question named a specific one. Let me look. I don't want to say the wrong one.
Okay.
We have so many questions. I'm still scrolling through.
It was a short list of people they knew were coming from other states. Okay.
Just because a list though is vetted does not mean that the convention is safe.
Right.
If you go to a funeral, if you go to a wedding, if you go to an event, these are not safe spaces. Convention is not safe space. A special meeting is not safe space. Your little meeting might not be a safe space. There are funerals that happen all the time. Like, these are not safe spaces for survivors. And Denise can speak to this, I think, and with quite a bit of expertise, and also, her experience as to what she's dealt with the overseers and workers in trying to get them to remedy this and put protocols and policies into place. Denise, can you talk about this a little bit?
Yes. Initially, after the information about Dean Brewer came to light, I was fielding phone calls and doing consultations with some overseers and multiple workers because they were asking for help with trying to sort these things out. And a recurrent theme, I think it's safe for me to say, a recurrent theme was that they were concerned about the perpetrator's soul. So if we looked at it from a scriptural perspective, which I'm never want to claim that I'm well versed on scripture per se, but the bottom line that I said to them was that was something that's between the individual and God, as to whether or not a person's going to have eternity with God. So it wasn't something that the overseers could rescue the person from or rescue them for salvation. So when the workers enter the overseers, when I would kind of present that part of the conversation to them, they still were just acting unsure and kind of saying, well, we still really want to be there for him, essentially. And so we tried some problem solving, and at that point, I was being very genuine and wanting to help them problem solve about how to sort these things out for safety for the victims. Because I did teach them that anytime a perpetrator is amongst anybody that's part of his selected victim pool, he's being triggered and he could relapse. That'll build up to a relapse. So I did provide them with that information as well. And then over the last year, we've seen, for whatever reasons, the leadership wants to continue to allow these people to remain and wants to continue to support these people more so than the victims. So at this point, it just appears that the top leadership, and that includes all the overseers, because to some degree, at some level, they're all in leadership roles, they're kind of united in that manner. That's kind of my impression. Because even that small handful that initially wanted to have a zero tolerance policy in the beginning, that has really shifted now. And I don't see any of the regions striving to want to have a zero tolerance policy in terms of having perpetrators amongst them. And I absolutely, Lauren, none of the venues, whether we're talking about convention, special meetings, gospel meetings, even home meetings, worship meetings, and Bible studies, none of those are truly safe environments with these people that some of them haven't even been identified yet. They're still flying under the radar. And so none of it is safe. And the overall tone that's being set from the top down appears to be that they're going to continue to support the perpetrators, whether the perpetrators are seeking to be honest or not, which most of them aren't, because what's the point of it when they can continue to fly under the radar and continue to satisfy their proclivities?
Right. And, some of the ones we've disclosed recently, there's one I'm thinking of course, he had allegations when he was in the work, and then he was removed from the work and he was made an elder. Seems like that's always the case. But I was thinking, what has he been thinking this whole last year? He had to know this was going to come out. But he sure wasn't going to go tell anybody. None of them have, right? There's been a lot of these. I think they're just waiting for the shoe to drop, but they're not going to go tell somebody. Yeah. And by the way, they accepted the meeting in the first place, right? They accepted their elder position in the first place. And in a lot of those situations, the workers were aware that person had allegations, and they give them a meeting in their home anyhow.
Yes.
So you have the workers working with the perps to make that happen, and it's pretty alarming.
Yes. One of the main operating strategies for any predatory person is to dodge as many bullets as possible. And then when something does get identified or come up, denial, denial, denial.
Yep.
And that's why, from a therapeutic point of view, if we're playing into their denial or supporting their denial, we're doing them a disservice. So really the bottom line, my message, bottom line, was to overseers and or to workers and or to elders and or to the friends, is to the degree that you're buying into his denial is to the degree that you're still supporting him actively perpetrating. And how is that helpful to him, or how is that helpful to any potential victim? So really, is that a Christ-like approach to support somebody in harming themselves, doing further damage? No.
Going back to the last question, it's specifically Daryl Dolan who is vetting people coming to convention, just wanting confirmation if that's a rumor or if it's true.
I don't know. I vetted some visitors to a convention in Alaska, which would be under his jurisdiction.
May I make a comment to that, please?
You bet.
Not specifically about Daryl Dolan per se, but it's my understanding, on the one hand, especially here in the States, because I haven't traveled to foreign countries, so I can't speak to that, but especially here in the States, this specific church is a very family church where virtually everybody knows somebody. And so the interesting thing is that if we're not going to have a unified policy, not only for the United States, but also worldwide for the church, and these predators, again, are very manipulative and very skilled at still getting their way. And so for a perpetrator to be known in one state, for instance, maybe the state of Minnesota, and so they know that they're not supposed.
Denise, we lost your sound.
Process seems like it's fairly impotent at this point. I don't think it's functional across the board at all.
We lost you for a little bit there, Denise. Was there anything that you'd like to repeat of that last part?
You just said that the vetting process, any vetting process at this point is fairly impotent because it's not meet the needs across the board because there's not a unified policy across the board. And I said that a perpetrator in Minnesota, using that as an example, they probably know that they're well known in Minnesota, so maybe they don't go to convention there, but they could go to convention in Alabama or Mississippi or Arizona and still be able to partake freely of the multiple day convention there. And there's nobody that's going to stop them from doing that. So any little vetting process is occurring, and I'm not criticizing anybody who is, but it's just impotent because we don't have a policy across the board. Does that make sense, Cynthia, what I'm saying?
Oh yeah, I agree. Yep.
And can I just add to that the circumstance that Denise just described about perpetrators traveling interstate and to other conventions this prior convention season, that in fact occurred, where they were purposefully doing that in order to stay out of their home conventions and going to other out-of-state conventions where they wouldn't be known.
Can we actually discuss, so, and we talked about this on the town or the panel, the town panel thing that we did recently, but you know, Denise, Todd, and Dr. Bolin, the three of you go to meetings, right? You yourselves successfully have or have not been groomed, right, by a lot of these perpetrators and pedophiles. So it's like, from your perspective, looking at this community, or looking at people that are even outside, as professionals, you know, the three of you are great at what you do and extremely successful, and it still happened to the three of you. So I think just explaining to this group of people like what that looks like and feels like, hindsight, and how successful they're at it, and also what these overseers being complicit in these criminal behaviors, like what that also means to the three of you.
Great
Who wants to go
question.
first?
Oh, yeah. Tag it. Yeah, I think it was the shock. I mean, I went through, my husband and I, and for those of you that don't know, my husband, he's a school psychologist. And so we're both in this field, in behavioral health field. And so when Dean Brewer came up, alarm bells just went off. And prior to Dean Brewer, we were aware of the Ruben Mata situation in California. We live in California, and we were in the Central Valley when when Ruben Mata's allegations came up, and looking back, you know, it seemed like the whole ministry came to the Central Valley to handle things. And so I remember now that taking a step back, like seeing the red flags that we didn't see at that time. We totally believed what we were being told. We, up to that point, didn't have any reason to not trust what we were being told. Hindsight now, just there was a lot of red flags that even professionals we didn't pick up on. And so there is a lot of like shame around that as a professional and growing up and being raised in this fellowship. Taking a step back, I call it betrayal trauma around that, where there is a significant betrayal with the ministry. And it's been going on for a significant amount of time. And that is, for Ben and I, we can't get past that, and we won't get past that. That is probably the number one betrayal that is just so significant, and it's very linked to complex trauma, but it causes you to take a step back and think, what just happened? And so it's deceit upon deceit. And then once we liken it to Ben and I, we've talked about this numerous times, like that veil kind of lifted over our eyes and we see things much differently now. And, but yes, the deceit upon deceit and the lies continue. And that's what is just so incredibly, frustrating. So I'll kind of let Todd or whoever else wants to jump in.
Well, I'll just say, and I said this in the summit that's going to be released here, parts of it shortly, but Sarah and I have had 7 workers in our home that have since in this last year been put out, or have been put out of the work, or have been disclosed as having been perpetrators. So of all of the number that have been put out of the work, we've had 7 in our home. So and one of those was, and I've told this story before, and so some can just ignore it, but one of those workers was actively abusing a child in our field while I was an FBI agent investigating crimes against children. So I tell that because to think that you're beyond, you can't be groomed is just not, it's not reality. Everyone can be groomed, and grooming is a long and patient process that perpetrators go through, and workers come into our homes with implied and pre-existing trust. And when they come into our homes, we trusted them, and it's been shown in this last year that is misplaced trust.
Yes, for me, when I reflect back, the first thing I'd like to share is that I wasn't born and raised in the church. I became aware of its existence when I was in my early 30s. A colleague introduced me to it, and I was invited to gospel meetings. So then after I professed and was baptized, and this was in Southern California, by the way, I continued to go to meetings, and the majority of the workers who first stayed with us and or that were in our field were women. And I didn't pick up on anything then. And eventually, even when we had a male worker stay with us, again, it seemed really appropriate. So I agree with what Todd said wholeheartedly. Any human being can be groomed. They are master manipulators. But more to the point for me, when I first became aware of the information about Dean Brewer, it rocked my world for a minute. It rocked my spiritual base in terms of the church. And I was very shook by it, very shocked. And then I said to myself, after about 15 minutes after I'd read the information, I said to myself, put your personal hat aside for a minute and put on your professional hat. And when I did that, pieces of the puzzle started falling together, because my background would be considered kind of more like a forensic background in terms of where the criminal justice system and the treatment system come together. And so then I started seeing that there's a difference between being groomed by an individual perpetrator or being groomed by a system. And that's where it started to come to light for me that we're being groomed by a system. Because to the degree that the leadership over the years have supported any of the workers or any of the friends that are perpetrators, that's a systemic issue. That's system-wide. That's not just a perpetrator. And so for me, when I started looking at it from a system perspective, a lot more pieces of the puzzle, like Natalie said, in hindsight, came together for me. And it was very harrowing and at the same time very enlightening for me to start looking at it from a criminal justice perspective. And so I still had hope at that point, and that's why I volunteered to go provide training in the 4 regions that requested it, because I was hoping that that there would be those in the ministry that would take a stand against the system that's in place. But I just don't know that that's going to happen at this point. I think it's a well-fed, well-supported system. And so to that degree, I've told the friends, at least the ones that I know of locally, that all of us have been duped to some degree. All of us are victims of this system to some degree or some level, just like what Natalie was saying in terms of the betrayal and in terms of the grooming.
Thank you.
Dr. Bolin, there's a question. Have workers approached you? If they have, what is their concern? Approached you about your involvement in AFTT. If they have, what are their concerns? And have you been asked to have the meeting removed from your home?
So in our region, no one has reached out. No one from the work has reached out to myself and Ben. There's been some rumors that have gotten back to us, just workers telling the fellowship don't trust Dr. Bolin. That's come back. Some other things, but no one has reached out. Initially, when the Dean Brewer letter was released, I was reached out to consult, and which, like Denise, I was happy to do so. I wanted to, but it soon became apparent that I was taking the stance of zero tolerance, period, and that did not fit in the narrative that the workers in our region wanted to hear. And so it was only a couple months. We were also, Ben and I had offered on 4 different occasions to not only develop a training, we would help facilitate it, bring professionals in, we would finance it, we would take it on the road. We were willing to do that. And we have offered that 4 different times to the region staff. That has all been declined. We have tried to put listening sessions on, like other regions have. We were able to have one listening session with about 14 people, and we felt like it was very successful. It was very professional, and we wanted to expand that, and that was declined as well. So no one has reached out. We do not have an open home to the ministry. We do not attend gospel meetings, special meetings, and convention. So that's where we're at today. We still do have a fellowship meeting in our home, and we are very open and we have open conversations with our fellowship meeting, but that's where we're at today. And as we know, that can change tomorrow. So.
There's been a question about any documentaries that are being made. Do you want to just summarize that?
I believe there's one that's supposed to be released at the end of May or the 1st of June.
And there has been a lot of interest in this situation being made into a documentary. We're just interviewing and in discussion, but
Yeah.
nothing solid.
We did not participate in the one that's coming out the end of May, 1st of June, but I am working with the producer to connect her with survivors to interview. So I've been doing that all along. That's really the story, in my opinion, is to let these survivors tell their stories and what they've been through at the hands of this fellowship.
Got a couple of questions about statistics outside the US. Do you have any specifically for Canada? And also a question if you have anything currently connected to West Africa.
Before we go into this, actually, I just want to say something. I know people are really quite like taken with the stats of deceased, alive, locations, etc. But to me, it's like if we're going to keep this survivor centric, it doesn't matter if the perpetrator is alive or dead. It doesn't matter where they're at. These workers and friends have traveled all over the world in multiple locations. Denise and Todd and Deb and Cynthia can speak to this and articulate it better than I can. But just because a perpetrator is dead or lives in a certain location does not mean that they haven't abused someone in a different location. Does not mean that the abuse and the trauma is not still existing for that survivor. So when we say 840, some perpetrators, that is a crazy number. And it doesn't matter where they're at, where they're alive or dead. A lot of, Dean Brewer traveled all over the world, right? If you look at the overseers and where they've been in the past year, Singapore for an overseers meeting, Washington this, Montana that, start looking at this and you add those up. And if you look at that group of men, how many of those men have been in different people's homes and stayed in different people's homes just in the course of 1 year? So just take that 840 number, and Denise and Todd and Cynthia and Deb, I'd just like you guys to offer some stats before we go into this so we can just reframe this slightly to be survivor centric instead of perpetrator centric, because this is a harrowing number. 840 is shocking.
Well, we don't even have things updated. We're constantly trying to keep it updated. So we're actually over that. It's just not into the system yet. But yeah, I was looking at a list the other day for South Africa, and Dean Brewer was on the list. He was all over the place, and all of these perps have been all over the place. So it's I mean, this is 100 years in the making. So it's not going to be wrapped up with a bow on it today. Someday all of that will be available, but it's just not available yet. And maybe Todd and Denise can talk about the numbers. I mean, when you talk about that many perps, the number of survivors is astounding. We will never know the true number of survivors.
I mean, statistically, the number of victims that each perpetrator has is astronomical. You see various reports on the numbers of that. If that were if that, just for example, just Dean Brewer, we know, I mean, it's known he was prolific, and the ones that the handful that are known does not represent the extent of damage that he has done. To me, it highlights how difficult it is for a victim or survivor to come forward. It's just there's so much shame in it, and so because we don't know, like just where Dean Brewer traveled for convention rounds in the past and through his time in the work, there's probably victims in almost every one of those areas that he's traveled to.
And I just want
Yes.
to add that Doyle Smith to this day still has yet to send out a letter to all of the places that Dean Brewer was and go door to door and rectify just that one situation. So if you take that one perpetrator and imagine all of the other perpetrators and all the places they visited, this is a global crisis.
Yeah, and we're just hearing from people who have just found out about what's going on because of some of the media exposure. They have just found out in the last couple months. And it's because they've left the fellowship because they were abused and tossed aside, because this is a perp-centric fellowship. So it's astronomical. I think, were you going to say something, Denise?
Yes, I just wanted to say that the average pedophile, and when I'm saying the term pedophile, I mean somebody that diagnostically would meet the criteria for a diagnosis of pedophilia, meaning somebody that has a primary attraction to prepubescent children. In other words, a child who has not gone through puberty yet. So the average pedophile has approximately 117 victims in his or her lifetime. And about 95% of pedophiles are males, very few females. So when I think about the nature of this church being all over the world, and these workers going to third world countries where access to children in different cultures is even greater. And when I think about sex trafficking and what we know about that, the numbers are even higher. But here in America, the studies have shown that the average pedophile has 117 victims in his lifetime. And another stat that's rang true over the years is that the average pedophile has had 40 victims by the time he turns 40. So again, and they do not age out, by the way. People think that when they become old men or if they're impotent, no, that's not accurate at all. They continue to perpetrate, usually to the day they die if they can. So 117 victims multiplied by whatever number of perps, again, it's astronomical. And we're only seeing the tip of the iceberg in terms of reporting.
But yeah, back to the question you asked, Mo, of West Africa and Canada. Cynthia and Todd can probably best answer that.
Well, I don't have a allegation specifically from West Africa, and the stats will be available someday. They're not ready yet.
We've addressed all the questions that have come in.
Wonderful. Anybody have any that they want to ask on camera?
Just raise your hand if you'd like to do that.
You want to know about Don Pufalt, though, specifically. Because there's, apparently they've contacted.
About Don Pufalt?
Yes.
He has more than one allegation.
Have you spoken to Jonathan Freeburn about any of these allegations in Atlantic Canada?
No, I tried last year to work with some of the workers in Canada, and I knew that some of the friends were trying to work with the workers in Canada, and it was a exercise in futility. So no, I didn't. And
Okay.
I knew other workers are aware of the allegations. So
Yeah, see, I just recently heard today that apparently Jonathan and a couple of the other sister workers have been calling other countries and asking around to see if the allegations are true or not, and they have found that they're not accurate. And that's what they're spreading for information in the area where he's located right now. And so that's
that
why I
would be,
was,
yeah, that would be typical. That would
Yeah.
be typical behavior on the part of the ministry.
yeah,
I hope the survivors aren't on this call listening to that.
I hope not. It's
Yeah.
terrible.
Yeah,
Thank you for answering.
you bet.
I thought there were, oh yeah, Julia Taylor. Yes.
So I just want to say again, thank you so much for all the work that you guys are doing. And I just heard this week that the burnout rate is about is less than 2 years, either around 2 years or less than 2 years. Can one of you guys comment on that? And then also, do you guys have a plan on, I'm assuming, Cynthia, because you've worked on this for so long, your burnout rate is that, but how can we support you guys? First of all, not burning out, and secondly, is that an accurate statement? The
Yeah,
2 year burn.
you bet. Yeah, we're exhausted. Not gonna lie about that. And we're trying to build our organization. We brought Dr. Bowen on as an executive director, and so she's working on building the organization so it's sustainable. And when we can make that happen, then we can take a step back and I mean, you see Todd's helping. Now we have Deb Rose helping, a retired FBI agent. We have Denise on board. We're growing our organization with professionals, so we share the workload, and funding will make it sustainable. And the survivors need so much care, and so we definitely want to make it sustainable for survivors.
Do you have people that know how to work on grants and collect grants?
We could use go ahead, Dr. Bowen.
If you or anybody has any grant experience and would like to volunteer, please reach out directly to me. I will put my email in the chat. We have finished 2 federal grants the past month, well, a month ago, and we are continuing to look at future grant opportunities, really to diversify our funding. Of course, we need donors and fundraising, but we also are going to be looking at future grants. So I will put my email in the chat. Please feel free to reach out to me.
Yeah, and props to Mo Doring, who's
Yes.
moderating this call, for doing a bang up job on writing grants. But I mean, it's a huge job to do by yourself. And you would probably welcome some help.
Is there a place where you can find, like, do research on finding grant money? Like, how would you even go about that?
Yeah, grants.gov.
Grants.gov?
Yep.
Okay.
And because we're a nonprofit that services survivors nationally and internationally, we really try to focus on federal grants because that covers all of us nationally. There's not a lot of grants, international grants. There's some, but the majority of grants are nationally.
So it's just a matter of taking the time to find what would
To
fit.
research.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you again for all your work, like
Thanks,
honestly.
Leah.
One more question that you all might be able to answer. Would you consider doing daytime Zoom like this so that people in Europe could tune in and be informed about the work you're doing here?
Absolutely.
I have a direct message question that I think we could address quickly or not. The overseers who are trying to make some policy for their states for preventing CSA, do you think they are honest movements or just a facade to keep people thinking things are being taken care of?
Todd?
I'm not aware. I am not aware of an overseer right now that's actively pursuing policy. The ones lately, and I'm not saying that it's not happening. I just certainly haven't heard that. The just for example, Minnesota, and Denise, you are well aware of all that. They brought Titus in, and he's made the statement that they're not going to adopt a formal policy. So I personally am not aware of any region that's actively pursuing a new policy implementation.
I see in the chat, Jen brought up Daryl Dolan in Washington, North Idaho, Alaska, has created a team to make guidelines. Daryl Dolan is not great for survivors. You know, Daryl needs some help himself and he's complicit. So, you know, at the end of the day, it's like, what good is a policy if a leader is not stand up for survivors? It doesn't mean anything. It's meaningless. And if there are conventions where multiple survivors have been raped and sexually abused on the premises and the property, well, what good is going to convention with a policy when that has happened on the property? What's the point? I think there's a lot to be learned here. And so I don't understand. I don't see one overseer that's done anything meaningful. And if you talk to the survivors, they feel the same.
Dave's had his hand up for a while.
Hey guys, thank you. And Cynthia, Lauren, all of you guys, like so many, thank you so much for all you're doing. My question is, Cynthia, you mentioned that you don't have to be concerned about defamation, slander, because you're not telling lies. And yet, like, you don't release the whole list of people with allegations. And then from time to time, you do put out somebody that has allegations, like a specific person. Can you speak to, like, I assume there's like a method around that as to what you released and when and why, and yet you don't release the whole list.
Right, which we will do eventually, but it's with a lot of work is gonna go into that before that happens. But we are working on that. Yeah, when I release a name, I make sure I've got all of the backup documentation I need. And it's not defamation or slander. If I have a legitimate allegation and I've vetted it, and we believe it's true, we believe in the truth of the allegation. We're not saying this person is 100% definitely a pedophile. We're saying this person has a credible allegation that we believe in. And then also with releasing the names on the list, you know, survivors have a lot of input into that as well. So there are some survivors that just do not want their perpetrator's name released to the public. And some of those are dead. And so we got to work with the survivors through this process too. It's a lot has happened in the last year. People are working through a lot, and we will go at their pace. Can you think of anything else to add to that, Todd, as far as the perp list?
No, I'm not an attorney, so as far as what constitutes slander or libel that reaches the threshold of defamation, those are legal distinctions that attorneys could speak to. But when a credible allegation arises and an investigation has taken place that shows that it's credible, announcing that there's an allegation is widely known not to be, that's not defamatory, and doesn't constitute either libel or slander from my understanding. So
Right. And we do get legal advice, and sometimes my disclosures are worded in a very specific way based on input from attorneys.
Do you all want to
Thank you.
address questions about individual allegations here? Do you want to name names here?
I'm happy to take the question and see where it goes.
There are several people that want to know about Rich Rasky and if there are allegations and
let me think about how to answer that. I'm not going to answer that here. I did a letter to Lyle last year. I saw somebody asking a question about if somebody doesn't want their perp name known or
right.
just popped up.
Yeah. And someone else comes forward with the same person. You don't want it known, but someone else makes it known.
Right.
What do you
But try and work with both of them. I mean, if there's more than one and when there's more than one, usually survivors are worried that they're going to be disclosed when they disclose the perpetrator. And you know what? That is a fear sometimes if you're in a very small community, and that can be a thing. But if there's more than one, especially if the person was a worker, especially if, I mean, the workers, I'm not going to keep hidden, but there's other reasons why people are fearful to have their perp name disclosed. If there's two and one wants it disclosed, we work through that with the survivors.
more specific names have come up. Do you want to talk about them?
I mean, probably not a good idea. What do you think, Todd?
you could see with the question. I mean, just ask the question and
Yeah,
then just
yeah.
Sure. Okay. We've got people asking about Horace Burgess.
His name's
Billy
on the yes, his name's on the perp sheet.
Okay. Billy Updegrove.
What's the last name?
Updegrove.
I don't think so.
But
They're both dead workers. Seeing that now.
Yeah, Horace is for sure.
If you have something to report, please, by all means, I think Todd was going there, but please submit a survivor submission form if you have anything to notify Aftt about.
in the fact that a worker is dead, I would just say, don't let that stop you from reporting.
I don't have any new questions here.
Julia's raising her hand.
So, will you ever be able to have the FBI come and do a interview with you or a Q&A? Would they ever be open for something like that?
Oh, no. Well, I'll let Todd answer that. No.
No, no, they won't do that.
Okay.
They just can't. They are restricted. I've spoken on this before, but just the rules of the grand jury process don't allow them to speak, and it's just they don't speak on active and open investigations because their voice to a matter. There's just legal constraints that keep them from being able to share information, and they're not in the information sharing business. So
Okay.
Actually, I'd like to add a little comment and question to that for Denise and Todd and Deb and Cynthia. Is it normal for people to speak about the FBI in the way that this community and its leaders are? Like, oh, the FBI is telling me I'm doing a good job, or the FBI has cleared me. Is this normal? Is this normal human behavior?
well, what it reflects is the some of the feelings that the workers got potentially when the agent was interviewing them, and it is purely a function of rapport building. When an agent wants information from someone, in this case a worker, they build rapport. They will stroke somebody's ego and tell them they're doing a good job in this, and just to keep that person talking. And that is the goal, is to keep them talking, and if it means complimenting them on the way they've handled elderly workers, so be it. That doesn't mean that that's just a way of extracting information. And I mean, for me, it highlights the naivete of the workers when they when they talk about it in those terms. But
I agree with Todd. It's been my experience. Law enforcement doesn't tip their hand, usually in terms of what they're seeking, in terms of the underlying current of the questions that they're asking. And I like the way that you frame that, Todd, saying that it's a rapport building technique. And it's something that also that I do therapeutically with the perpetrators. But it's usually more in a genuine manner. But I agree with you. Law enforcement, they're not going to tip their hand in terms of what's truly happening. And in terms of the naivete, yeah, that's been my sense too. A while back, I was made aware that a particular overseer had made a comment that he wouldn't be afraid to go to jail. And I thought to myself, oh boy, he should be very afraid. So I didn't know if that was a bold statement, or I don't know what context that statement was made in. But if these folks were had any real sense of what occurs in jails and prisons, especially with perpetrators, they probably wouldn't be making that statement. So yeah, I think it does speak to some naivete.
I mean, this might not be a very popular thing to say, but I also think they're professional gaslighters. I'm looking at a letter right now that a worker in Canada wrote to somebody, and it says the West Coast brothers who have talked to the investigators have revealed that they were complimented on what they have done in trying to make day-to-day living safe for the vulnerable in this fellowship. They were also given some additional guidance for help in the future. Their investigators are trained and qualified and aren't content with the version that various individuals who used to profess are quick to extend on various internet websites. So that's kind of the message of the ministry. It really is. I've talked to workers. I mean, it's about that you are not in this fellowship anymore, and therefore we do not believe you. But I guess the FBI is okay, even though they don't profess either. But that's the messaging.
well, and I'll just tell you too, just even that comment about well, we're not too concerned about the reports from bitter people and that have left the fellowship. That's totally rapport build, just like we understand. That's just what you do in an interview to keep the person talking, because the key to it is if the person you're interviewing shuts down, interview over. And so you'll say literally about, I mean, agents in law enforcement lie. They'll say what they need to get the person to keep talking. And I believe that was just a tactic in the interview. So I would not get upset about that, and just know what it is. It's the agents just saying things that help the interview to continue. So.
Yeah, we've also had reports that there are folks within the fellowship, you know, spreading that as well, that the investigations basically a narrative that's being pushed by a few people, like that it's not really a real thing. And it is.
There's a couple of questions about investigations. Would you talk through how you go about investigating an allegation? And would you talk about your cooperation or the FBI's cooperation with the Canadian police?
Well, okay, so if it is a case that comes into the FBI victim survey, and it involves Canadian citizen and an abuse that took place in Canada by even a Canadian citizen, that information would be passed through the legal attaché office of the FBI that is located in the U.S. embassies in foreign countries. So not every, but many countries have FBI personnel that are attached to United States embassies overseas. And so when that information would come into the victim survey line, it would be shared and passed through the legat, that is the short term for that, but it's the legal attaché office in whatever country is pertinent. It would not be the FBI doesn't travel to conduct international. I mean, some countries like Canada, they could, I suppose, but there would always be an RCMP investigator that but generally it would be RCMP that conducted the investigate or the interview, and rarely would it FBI agent interview a foreign national on foreign soil.
So Cynthia, can you talk about how you go about investigating allegations?
Yeah, it's probably not much different than how Todd would run one for the FBI. Really, you take the information in, you figure out if there are any other ways to corroborate the allegation through witness testimony, documentation, and you just move through the process. And I mean, we're trained investigators, so we know the things to look for as well when somebody is. And Dr. Bolin she has years and years of experience with CPS. It's the same type of investigation. You guys can probably speak better to it than I can, but that my job as an investigator is to figure out if allegations are credible. That's what I do for my job, in my real job. Working for attorneys on cases with child sex abuse allegations.
Yeah, and I spent years in child protective services. I was an investigator out in the field, investigating allegations of child abuse, handled a lot of sexual abuse cases. And so when you go in and you investigate, you look at who is reporting, and if you can interview the child, and collaterals around to corroborate. But also you look at what is being reported. There's certain details that children won't have unless abuse has taken place. And you look at the environment. There's a lot of things that you take into your investigation. And it takes a lot of time to investigate at times. And so it's not a rush. You don't, it's how you ask questions. You don't ask leading questions. You have to be very careful how you ask your questions and obtain the information, because this information could be scrutinized in court. And so, like Cynthia said, when I did my investigations, I made sure I had enough evidence to be able to go into court. And I was an expert. I did give expert testimony in court on my investigation, and it was under perjury. And so, but yeah, many years of experience in that.
And can I say that the standard for for fellowship safety is credible allegation. It is not, proof is not being gathered beyond a reasonable doubt, which is the legal standard for the judicial system. So nobody is trying to develop that level of investigative evidence. In law enforcement, whether it be state investigators or the FBI, have a much different tool set that can be used in criminal investigations, search warrants, online things, records that are not available to private investigators, and certainly not to AFTT. It's not, AFTT can't execute a search warrant. But it's because the standards of investigation are different. And in a criminal investigation, you must prove in court that the person is guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. And that is not the standard that is applied for the purposes of fellowship safety. It's credible allegation. So.
And that's the same in all of the cases I work on, my civil cases.
This is a question for Todd. Is there evidence of sex trafficking in our community?
I don't know. I would say that that will be part of what the FBI is investigating. Is the statutes that relate to human trafficking are they call it's the Mann Act, and it's MANN, and it was it is they are the statutes, the tools in the federal violations that constitute human trafficking. To prove that is not an easy proof, and whether or I simply, and Cynthia and we don't, because like I just had mentioned, the tools that the FBI has to investigate crime are much different than what AFTT can do. So they have been able to gather evidence that we just simply don't know about. So whether they can prove that human trafficking occurred sufficient to seek an indictment, which is a probable cause statement, but then further than that, then the next hurdle is proof beyond a reasonable doubt, which is the judicial threshold for a guilty verdict. So we simply don't know what evidence the FBI is holding right now that would prove human trafficking.
Lauren, do you want to call on people that have their hands up?
Sure. I just have one quick question before we head over there. So for the survivors who have filled out the victim surveys, will the FBI be reaching out to everyone who filled one out, or just a section of those? And do you know if they will do a longer interview in each case, or do the statements provided in the surveys suffice in some cases?
That's for you, Todd.
Okay. Well, I would say that whether they'll reach out to everyone, I don't know that. It'll depend on, they would have a resource allocation method that they will employ to look at what's been reported and determine whether whether that information furthers their investigation. And then as to if somebody gave a very detailed written statement, they're always going to be, if it was a charge or if it was an allegation that does warrant a further contact, it would be in person. It won't be just like that statement is not sufficient because, and I know this might be, if there was going to be a federal charge, there will have to be face-to-face contact. And if people need support in that process, because that can be very scary for survivors to anticipate that type of interview, I would say reach out to advocates and they'll help all that they can. I wouldn't let that worry you. Just know that there's going to be support in that whole process.
And I will also add, Todd, that I spoke to a survivor this week who had an FBI interview, and it was exhausting, and they survived. And also the FBI at their local FBI agents at their local field office were really, really kind and thoughtful. And so if that's not your experience, or if it's difficult, please by any means reach out. We're here happy to walk that path with you. And Dr. Bowen has lots of techniques and help, and we are happy to provide you with an advocate, or if you need post support with a trauma therapist, please let us know and reach out, because we're happy to walk that path with you.
I know I've seen some people commenting online, like I haven't heard from anybody yet. It's going to be a long slog. It's going to take a while, and they do want people to keep reporting. I think we forgot to mention that they want people to keep submitting whatever they may know of. And Todd, I think Deb she had to hop off, but she was going to talk about if you know of somebody who was manipulated into not talking, that should be reported.
Yeah. Well, that kind of the conversation that we had a couple of days ago, Deb and yourself and I, was because of some of the threats that were made to some people who by a worker about things don't go well for people who speak up. So if there's more of that type of thing, report it to the FBI. Use the victim survey process to make sure that information is known. That is important to the FBI, those type of threats.
Mm-hmm.
Let's Monty Johnson. Let's unmute.
Me?
Yes, you.
Very good. Thank you so much for all your help and the different views that we can learn to get this thing turned around. I agree with Cynthia so much about how long it's going to take to this thing that's been festering for at least a century, I guess. And the input that Todd has to get the different angles on where we can be useful. And I guess my education was from Colombo. I don't know if anybody watched TV back.
No, Monty, nobody watched TV.
I was the bad kid. This guy, he's like half cross-eyed. He's asking these dumb questions, but he keeps talking. He keeps them going, and you know, that's what some of us are doing. And, you know, that's why it takes time to figure out, you know, who's on whose side. And we have our credible sources that we trust. And so I'm not real anxious to do a lot of writing or reading because I have dyslexia. So I have to go kind of at a different angle, and I still go to the meetings, and sometimes I just try to say something about the sheep and the sheep dogs and stuff like that, because that that seems to work for me. But I imagine, you know, when it can keep rolling and get some of this stuff together, that there'll be some of us that can work together, that we can once we do the legwork, we can just take it to Cynthia and have the logistics of it done in your services. And so I guess I really don't know what my question is, but I get everything backwards.
Quite all right.
So anyway, that's my 2 cents.
Thanks, Monty.
Thanks, Monty.
You're welcome.
Mike, I think it's you. Nope. Did we lose your video?
There he is. I think you're muted, maybe.
Yeah, we can't hear you, Mike.
Your lips are moving, but we can't hear you.
No. Weird.
Yeah, he wasn't there. You're unmuted, but for some reason we can't hear you. Well, do we have anything else? Mike's still working at it.
We can see you, but cannot hear you, Mike.
There
Mike,
he is.
maybe,
There. Oh, that
maybe
was,
you can type your question. If you can type it into chat, I'll read it out. You had no. Oh, sure. Okay.
we tried. It's okay, Michael. It's okay.
It happens.
All right, you guys. Is that no more questions?
There's one more.
Okay.
Would you offer some examples of financial abuse?
Todd.
Financial abuse. I mean, I think of it in terms of misuse of funds. So people give money intending that it would be used to support the gospel going forth in a particular area, or potentially maybe they gave money for needs of convention, and then that money is used for something completely different. So it's kind of the false pretenses aspect of financial investigations. And yeah, I mean, proving that is not an easy thing to prove, but if money for example, Dean Brewer, I mean, that's just maybe the most flagrant thing we can all think of, but his staying in a hotel and then doing what he was doing with money that presumably came from somebody's heartfelt donation to the ministry is totally financial abuse. And it's things like that are agreed. Well, anytime any worker is using money to further an abuse of a child, or that it's using it, that is financial abuse. And I mean, in its most flagrant kind of sense to me. And Denise or Cynthia, what do you think?
Oh, I agree, but I was going to also add, we're learning there's a lot of money. That, I mean, at this point, some of the overseers aren't denying it either, that there's millions of dollars sitting in trust funds, all around the world. And I find it interesting that Dr. Bolin, who's still in the fellowship, is here helping survivors, and she's applying for grants, and this is to help survivors, and they're sitting on millions of dollars. This homeless, penniless ministry is sitting on millions of dollars that could help the survivors. We would love to have that money for survivors. I mean, I've been saying for the last year, I would love for every survivor to get a lump sum settlement, which I think we could make happen if they would open the coffers. So to me, that's financial dishonesty. It's not going to meet a legal standard for fraud, but I just think it's dishonest and disingenuous totally. And it'd be nice if they take care of survivors.
We have no more questions in the chat.
All right. Wonderful. We don't love 3 or 4 hour Zooms anyhow. So like the last one. So this is great. Good. I hope we answered everyone's questions to your satisfaction, and feel free to reach out if you have questions at any time. We're happy to answer what we can.
Thank you all for joining.